So when we talk about GCP, we talk about that every individual who is working in a clinical research domain, that person, that staff need to be trained on GCP. So understanding for GCP is very important for conducting the clinical research. Why? Because GCP gives us the standards that is important for the researchers, for the research staff to know that how the subjects need to be protected, how we are going to collect the data, how we can prove that the data that we have collected during the trial is credible, is reliable. So for that reasons, what are the standards that we need to maintain in order to get the data accepted by the regulatory authority is being laid down in the GCP. So everyone who is involved in the clinical research directly or indirectly should be well aware of the GCP. So whether the person who is designing the trial, that how actually the trial will be planned out and how the trial will be executed, then who all are going to carry out the trial at the site, how we are going to manage the trial, how the data analysis will be carried out, how data will be collected, how the final report is being written out. So each and every staff who is involved in the trial, whether directly or indirectly, whether working at the site or working as a backend staff or as backup staff, if someone is working in a team as a backup, so if the main person is not around, that person is going to cover the person's duty. So that person is known as a backup. So that backup person should also be aware of the GCP. So everyone indirectly, directly involved in the trial should know about the GCP, that is good clinical practice. That these are the standards which talks about that how humans who are participating in the trial will be protected, plus what kind of data will be accepted in order to get the approval for the product and to launch the product in the market. So all those standards are being laid down in the GCP guidelines. So from there is one section in GCP. So when we talk about the complete GCP guidelines, okay. So when we talk about GCP, we are talking about the complete GCP guidelines, and the GCP guideline consists of 8 sections. So in GCP, we have 8 different sections. Like first section, we talk about the definitions. Have we?
As I was mentioning that in GCP there are 8 sections. First section talks about definition. Second section talks about the 13 principle of ICH GCP that we are going to study today. Okay. So GCP principle is a part of GCP guidelines. Okay. So if someone asks you, tell me about GCP. So you are going to listen the question properly, whether it's GCP or it's GCP principle. So the GCP guidelines can be called as just GCP. So when someone asks you what is GCP, tell me about something about GCP. So in GCP we talk about 8 sections that we are going to discuss in later sessions. If someone asks you, tell me the principle of GCP. So principle of GCP is a part of GCP guideline. Under section 2 of GCP guideline, we talk about all the 13 principle of GCP. Is this much clear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So GCP, as we have already discussed, these are the global standard or the international standards, which tells us that how the trial needs to be carried out at a global level. So these guidelines are being followed globally, not just confined or limited to a particular country. So when we talk about ICH, we have seen that a lot of countries are a part of ICH. So each and every country which is a part of ICH follow the ICH guidelines in their country when we are carrying out the trial. So all the local guidelines that are being created like if you talk about Indian GCP, so Indian GCP evolved from ICH GCP. So if someone knows ICH GCP, they knows what the Indian GCP says. So it's just a few additional things that are being added to Indian GCP, but every country consider as a parent figure or parent or father figure to this GCP guidelines, and from there the other guidelines are being created. So if someone knows ICH GCP guidelines, they almost 90% of the other countries guidelines they know about it, because after knowing ICH GCP, it's just the minor changes that the at the country level they want to include some more guidelines to their mm, guidelines. So yeah, so GCP is the standard, so which is being followed at a global level. So when we talk about the GCP, that the good clinical practice need to be followed while we are carrying out the trial. So it's not, it's every step of the clinical trial. Like we are planning that how this is the trial we are going to perform. And then after planning, we execute that plan by carrying out the trial. We perform different tasks, procedures, tests during the trial on the patients. Then we monitor by the monitors that by the CRS that the trial is being carried out properly, following the guidelines, making the data acceptable, credible. Then, if the data is being manipulated and if the sponsors feel there is a need to again give a second review to the trial, then the audits can be carried out. There is a proper way of recording the trial results, that whatever results we get from the patients need to be recorded properly. Then the data that we have, the results that we have, those results will be analyzed by the biostatisticians to conclude the research. So at every step, so this is what we already discussed in the previous slide, that every person who is involved in the trial directly or indirectly will be following the GCP. So how they will follow the GCP? When they are performing their part, their task, they make sure that the GCP standards are met. So if we are designing the GCP, how the trial needs to be designed, how we can how what we need to consider for making the safe subjects safe during the trial, how the data will be made acceptable or credible, so what steps, what activities need to be carried out. So at every step, every person who is involved in the trial is bound to follow the GCP guidelines. So if the GCP guidelines are not followed, the data that is being created or developed during the trial won't be accepted by the regulatory authority, and that trial will be of no use because the results are not accepted. So that's why to get the data accepted, it is very important to follow the standards of GCP. So, do we know that the GCP was being formed by the association of three countries? Do you know that?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So initially, the three founder countries, that is Europe, Japan, and US, has formed the ICH, which ICH organization. It's an organization which has developed the ICH guidelines. Sorry, which has developed the GCP guidelines, and later Canada, Switzerland also joined the ICH. So now we are going to study about the ICH principle. So there are 13 principles in ICH. So these 13 principles that you see here, ethical principle of declaration of Helsinki, these are the short terms which is being mentioned here, or this is not the complete principle, it's just being written in short. So this becomes easy for you to retain all the 13 principles. Okay, so if during your mock or during your final interviews you are being asked to explain the 13 principle, or just tell me about how many principles are there in ICH GCP, and just explain me five of the ICH GCP principle. So you're not going to just say benefit justify risk. So that is for you to remember that if you just say benefit justify risk, you need to later explain the complete principle. Okay. So these are the 13 principle of ICH which is present in section 2 of GCP guidelines. Section 2 talks about the definition.